frankly. Premium pay for essential workers is an area that we're exploring and want to see if we can bring that in to benefit some of our ongoing discussions with staff. Our rehire costs, we deferred a number of positions. We're going to explore that further. And then I really want to look at, frankly, the pandemic costs that we included in the current year's budget, $533,000. On its face, that seems to be very clearly to qualify. And I think I'll have some clarity for your next meeting in terms of this very finite package. And then frankly, the lease of the House of Lights building may well qualify as well. We would not have leased that space otherwise but for. So I'm very confident in saying that we'll be able to well document that first $1 million request. And then we'll have time, frankly, over the next 12 months to figure out how to approach the second half. I think the goal here for all of us really ought to be, how can we really maximize the benefit of this money? And to do so, in my opinion, we should be spreading it over as many fiscal years as possible, that we don't kind of grab it all at once. And luckily we can't, frankly. And so that really begs the question, and what I want to kind of pose to you, and I'll perhaps provide a couple of suggestions, and this conversation could be carried over into the council workshop on Tuesday as well, is if, talking about $1 million coming in FY22, there's a couple of options. You could simply bring it as a revenue, and the purpose it would serve is drive down your tax rate. And that is laudable, arguably, but I think it's also short-sighted, frankly. It's going to kind of create this artificial short-term relief, and it's also going to create kind of $1 million hole in revenue in your budget that we're going to have to reckon with going forward. So I think perhaps a better strategy might be to provide some to tax relief, and that's a council prerogative. And then let's say half to tax relief and half to creating, it could be anything, such as a tax rate stabilization fund that the council could use in the future to help smooth out the tax rate. Later in the discussion, we're going to be talking about creating a capital projects fund. You could have the money go there. And again, I think it would ultimately benefit the taxpayer by having a source of funds to fund capital items, projects, or equipment. So I think there's options there, and I really want to encourage us to have a deep conversation around how to put these monies to best use for the longest time possible. So I guess the final thing is, we don't need to have all the answers for the full 2 million. In fact, I think we ought to take time to talk about the second half. What we do need to focus on is how we're going to kind of use this $1 million in the coming fiscal year. I think that is should be the subject of your discussion between now and second reading. I think there's others that should be brought into the discussion potentially, because there's other qualified uses for benefiting our residences and businesses to some extent. We can set up programs to do so. That's a longer, deeper discussion, I think, that a lot more people around the table need to be part of.
Hey, Tom, where can we read or get the detail that you have on all the qualified uses, just to,
Sure. I'll send you a fact sheet. Yeah, I'll send you a full link, but the fact sheet that they provide on that link, and forgive me, I thought I already did, but if I haven't,
might have, I just might not have seen it.
I will send it out before I go home tonight. But there's a 8-page fact sheet that goes through pretty good detail.
Hey, Tom.
Yes.
Are you starting to feel inflationary pressures? And everybody knows the minimum wage in Maine goes up $1 a year, and that we're not exempt from that, obviously. Are you starting to feel that inflation may be a factor that we have or haven't factored in right now into the budget, in terms of what might happen next year with what our actual expenses end up being?
Yeah, I guess I haven't considered it in that broadest term, but we certainly have considered the certain commodities we consume. I mean, asphalt is driven by petroleum prices. We do buy a lot of fuel. So, I think there's some indicators, at least near term, that those costs are going up. I don't know. I'm not in a position to necessarily predict over the next 12 months whether that will be sustained. But that's the sort of inflationary, from a wage point of view, we have very few folks making minimum wage. So our scales are in excess. I think in most cases, even our seasonal staff is at or above minimum wage. So
Okay.
Liam is here and he can certainly elaborate further if you wish. Liam, I wonder if you could stop sharing screen just so we can see each other.
Sure.
Thank you.
Councilor Hamel, thank you for joining us. I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks for the invite. And I wanted to be respectful of committee process, but I want to thank Tom and the committee for this, this discussion and this information. I think it's very timely, very helpful. So, my questions really are not ones I doubt we can answer in the meeting today, but it does seem to me that with all the stimulus money and hearing the discussion, that our challenge is to figure out how to put this in certain places where it's going to help us not only short term, but also longer term to address some of the structural issues that we have in town. The biggest fear I have of all, and I don't really know the process for how to solve for this, but that fear is taking the stimulus money and using it to build things in that are going to create basically a higher cost basis for us, essentially giving us the opportunity to build in headcount, build in activities, build in services that, guess what, in a year, the stimulus money goes away. That is my biggest concern of all. And I know we did, I thought, a very good job with a lot of unknowns last year when COVID first arrived. And I know we have, in some ways, a better handle on that. And in other ways, we are seeing things that are happening that are really moving quickly, housing shortages, inflation, this craziness with gasoline shortages, and so forth. So, I don't want to just raise all these impossible questions without an answer, but I would like to know how we are going to move through that as a committee and as a council, next couple of weeks, essentially.
I might be able to help with that, Don. So to my knowledge right now, the only budget where federal relief funds are being used for what you might consider run rate costs like staffing and equipment is within the school department. But we question them on that. And for staff that are being brought on with grant funds, they make them sign a waiver so that they understand that it's a temporary position. It's a one-year position.
Right.
That would be subject to, it's not going to be automatically renewed like some other positions might be.
Yeah, I had heard that. That's very encouraging.
And Don, on the town side, there are some new initiatives. Frankly, I didn't make them relying on and I'm proposing that we use federal money. I wholeheartedly agree with your concern. We shouldn't be using one-time money that goes away and we're stuck with a bill. So the good news is this money is coming in after we're having this budget discussion, not at the front end.
Yeah.
It's been looming and promised, but it's not being used to supplant or to advance new programs, new people.
Great. That's very reassuring. And I feel very confident that, we're being thoughtful about it and we're, going to be careful to make the right decisions. But clearly it's going to come down to priorities. It's going to come down to us making decisions among things that are essential, really essential, and other things that could wait. And naturally, we're not going to address all the needs. So it's a balancing act. There's no question about it. But I think the trajectory and the process that you have and where we are right now, I feel very comfortable that we'll end up in a good place. But, the public hasn't really been fully engaged in this yet. I know the close readers, the hobbyists have been tracking very carefully with your meetings and so forth. But I think it's safe to say even, the beyond the folks that, are on the committee from the council, we're really trying to buckle up here in the next couple of weeks to make sure that we're going to, have a soft landing. But all indicators are positive, and I really appreciate the energy and the thoroughness of the town staff and the committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Any other questions on the general overview of where we are? We're going to get into the capital projects reserve fund at the end. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, it was related to that. So Tom, in your spreadsheet that you have, where you had those projects with the CIP reserve listed, are those the projects that we're assuming we're going to use this capital reserve for?
Yeah, forgive me, they assume that you're going to approve them ultimately, and if so, we're proposing a different funding source from this
Okay.
capital reserve, yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
So if
Can
you
you-
don't
can you-
approve,
can you-
if you don't approve the project, the funding need goes away, obviously.
Can you just, again, quickly, just kind of the tagline for each of those, just kind of share what those were? Or do we want to wait till we get to the discussion on the actual capital reserves?
From a flow perspective, it probably makes sense to just cover that now. I believe they're proposing, the way it reads, is funding this capital equipment reserve with excess excise tax revenues from this year. Because excise taxes are trending well ahead of target or budget. And that opens up, you can then use those funds for eligible projects, right? And we have some on our plate right now where they can no longer be funded with bonds because of changing SEC rules or IRS rules. But they don't have to be. You can also let them set aside, just sit there in the fund, and you can use them for small equipment or other capital related needs that come up that are relatively consistent over time, but we always wind up bonding these things because we can't afford to pay for them, with taxpayer funds. So it's something that we've wanted to do as part of our financial and fiscal policy for a long time. Frankly, we've never been in the position to be able to do it without having a larger than 3% increase in the tax rate. So I view kind of creating that fund as one thing, and then determining if you want to use them for these specific projects is a separate decision.
So yeah, to elaborate, John, we're proposing to fund 4 different projects in the CIP. There's a project on Spur Rink Road, one on Mitchell Hill Road, another one on Highland Avenue. Those are all kind of sidewalk and or road reconstruction related. They're basically engineering, pre-engineering. There's an additional request from the library. And lastly, the school has additional funds for their planning efforts. So the first 4 that I mentioned, we're proposing to draw from the CIP reserve that we're proposing you create. And the school monies, we're proposing to use school impact fees to pay for that. We believe it's an appropriate use, as opposed, the alternative and what's in the budget is raising tax dollars to pay for all of those. And that's about $900,000 in total, as I recall.
So Tom,
Yes.
you said some of these that if the project gets funded, we can recover those soft costs once we bond.
Yes.
Is it your thought that we would replenish this with that, or have you thought about that one way or the other, or?
Yeah, my idea that it would go back to this reserve account. I mean, ideally, this would be evergreen. So it's a way of financing for a year or 2 or 3 until the capital asset actually materializes and you're ready to bond it. So it's a way to finance it. Yes, I would recommend that at the time we go to bond, we include the costs already invested in planning. And those proceeds, bond proceeds, go back into this fund so they're ready to fund the next project.
Thank you.
Did everybody have a chance to read through what Tom and Ruth have brought forward as the town council order to create this fund?
Could you share that? That's in the meeting packet.
This is something that we're going to talk about at our full town council workshop next week as well, but hopefully have an action item on it on Wednesday. So I don't know if there's appetite to put this forward with a recommendation from finance, or if you want to just let it kind of flow through. I think it's actually, I'm excited that we're able to bring this forward right now. I think it's a wonderful thing.
I should say one of the things that we contemplated, Ruth and I, was to build a mechanism to have, should this occurrence, and what I mean by that is, should our excise tax ever exceed our budget estimate in the future, and that's happened, that initially we're going to set this up that some percentage of that, or maybe all of that, would simply go to this fund as a matter of policy. Legal counsel advises that this council can't direct and bind a future council, and so that kind of provision has been removed. So this starts with the initial 700,000 from the current year. And then what I spoke to earlier, I think, is a way, and there's other ways that you could fund this, presumably in the future. It would take additional action of council. But I think by using proceeds, bonds proceeds to replenish this fund is a very reasonable way. And it gives me comfort that there'll be resources in future years as well.
So it would be
Would this,
bond funds plus any overage from excise budget estimate?
I missed the first part of the question.
So it would be refunding it with the bond proceeds. So when we take the soft costs and put them in, and then plus any excess from excise.
Well, that was the only, this simply moves $700,000 from the current year. It doesn't speak to a mechanism, it doesn't have a mechanism to do that going forward.
Okay, yeah.
But
that's-
I hear what you're saying. There could be an additional section that there again, you're binding a future council. You know, every time you go to bond, you need to approve that bond issue. So future councils will approve those as they come. Perhaps we could come up with language that simply enshrines that in language, doesn't make it absolute. I think it's helpful to have things in writing just to keep people consistent over time.
Yeah, Tom, I think we could also set a target, not right now, it would require some research, but there's probably an appropriate amount to hold in that capital reserve fund based on, how it's going to be used for either for soft costs or small equipment or even some larger equipment. So if we have that target in mind, and it's based on research, then we could, budget essentially to increase the fund over time.
Your fiscal policy says no less than $1 million. We should create such a fund and it shall be no less than $1 million. So that's the other thing about this, is this presents an opportunity for us to actually advance something that's already in your policy that we've said that is a priority. We just, as you said earlier, we just have never found a way to commit to doing it.
Yeah. So John, Betsy, do you need more time to process on this one?
I think I'm okay. I think this is a great idea. I think one question I have is, does this come into play only if and when we're within our guidelines for fund balance? So what would happen if we were below our fund balance target? Would this would we first have to get the fund balance where it needs to be before we would put additional money in this fund?
This would now be assigned fund balance as opposed to unassigned. So without doing this, you might exceed the allowable target in our financial and fiscal policy. And some of that, I think, is expected to be directed towards a capital reserve fund, or there's a couple other uses that can happen. But, Ruth, you might help to speak more clearly than I just did, but.
It does essentially come from the excise revenues at the end of this year will close to fund balance, and we'll take it out of fund balance and make it assigned fund balance if this is approved.
Okay.
And we would do something similar to that annually if that were approved to happen.
Don, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Just a quick, to add to this discussion about the reserve, the capital reserve. I know this is knocked around for several years and we've not been successful in making it happen. So I like the discussion that you're having around this, as maybe this isn't the time for us to do that. And I had a follow-on question for Tom. I mean, who knows what's going to happen with the capital markets and with inflation and so forth, but would this be a time for us to explore the potential of restructuring our debt? I mean, is there a way that we could lock in, better long-term debt, or somehow restructure that with what we're dealing with now?
Yeah, every time we go to bond issue, our financial advisor looks at our portfolio and brings forward opportunities to refund. Keep in mind, certain certain bond issues we have in place have call dates, so you can't touch them for a certain period of time. So there's a whole complicated series of maneuvers, but rest assured on an annual basis, or to the extent that we borrow annually, and we typically do, we do that thorough analysis of the full portfolio of debt we hold.
And we just did that last year, right, Tom? With
Correct.
a
We
decent
have.
portion.
Yes. We
Yeah, I
have.
don't know the answer to it, but does this present an unusual opportunity to do that, or is this absolutely the wrong time to do it? So that's just a rhetorical question. So.
You know, I haven't paid attention to the municipal bond market lately, but I suspect it's still very, very favorable. We'll know that when we go back to market next time.
Great, thank you.
Just a final point of this, if you were to do nothing, this additional excise revenue, which frankly is probably closer to $1 million than 700,000, will be realized, we'll receive it, and it will simply flow to fund balance. And so, that is an option, but I think the value of this is it's an opportunity for us to actually advance a really important priority that I haven't heard anyone disagree with. And I think it gets us away from the habit of using fund balance. I'd rather let that build slowly over time and really not touch it. And we've had to for any number of reasons. And so the more of these dedicated funds we can create and stay true to it, I think the better we are.
I agree. John, I'm comfortable if we want to, motion to, have us as a finance committee support this to bring it
Okay.
forward to the rest of the council if you want to go down that path.
So I'll take that as a motion if it was offered as one. Okay,
It was.
is there a second?
I'll second for discussion.
Okay, any discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd like to get a full council discussion on it. I think, it's definitely something that needs to be done in some way. I guess I have a little difference on, we were saying the more of these funds that we have, the more targeted that it helps. I mean, when you get too many of them, you end up like your tax rate ends up higher with all these special funds that you can't actually pull money out of to actually reduce the tax rate. So, I think right now the overage and excise, just goes into the fund balance. And so in a way, we're doing the same thing, because I think what you were saying, Tom, is we go into the fund balance and then we would pay for some of these soft costs out of the fund balance. So
Good.
it's sort of a way to isolate it. So yeah, I might abstain and just I'm not for it or against it at this point, but I'd just like to hear my fellow counselors weigh in on it, and certainly my fellow finance committee members, if you want to weigh in on it, and then that will definitely give me some food for thought.
I think my view, Betsy, on it is that, to me, this ties into the conversations we've been having, but haven't necessarily been able to kind of really dig into around long-term financial planning. And so I see this as a key mechanism to help us, especially with our CIP, to look long-term and make sure that we're setting aside funds appropriately, so that as we look forward and see all these projects that are coming down the pipeline, we have those funds available set aside to fund some of those projects. So the opposite doesn't happen, where we get to them, but we don't have the funds and then have to go down the path of appropriating them. So I just see this as maybe it's a little bit more conservative method to longer term financial planning. But I think given all the elements we have in our CIP right now, I think starting this to be able to have it and build that discipline is going to, have really long-term financial positive effects for the town.
Yeah, I agree, John. I'm not looking to create 100 funds. This is one, and it's a conservative approach, because if you just let it sit in an unassigned fund balance, then any future council can use it for pretty much anything that they want. And while flexibility is great, I think our capital needs are fairly well documented and planned for and known. And setting aside funds today to help create a funding mechanism for those going forward, I just think is fiscally responsible. It's a good thing to do. And it doesn't necessarily increase the tax rate. To me, when the next time you go to purchase some regularly planned small equipment, you might be able to tap a fund like this as opposed to tapping the taxpayer at the
Right,
time.
yeah, I agree. I mean, it's gonna have to be done one way or the other. So,
That's right. Yeah. So go ahead, Tom.
Well, is there any interest in me trying to insert some language, kind of the evergreen nature of this? So the expectation is that if and when these projects actually come to fruition and for which we borrow money, that the expectation is we'd include these investments in that borrowing and replenish the fund commensurately.
I think we should.
I mean,
think so
doing
too.
so, I think it's helpful just to keep us all honest and consistent over time, and it gives the confidence that this is actually going to be evergreen in nature, that there'll be resources going forward.
I think for projects, that makes a lot of sense. For some of the smaller, regular capital items, I'm under the impression that you won't issue bonds for those. You'll fund them
Fair
through
enough.
this mechanism. Yeah.
No, fair. I appreciate your distinction with projects.
So I think with that understanding that you may enhance the language between now and next week, I think I would be in favor of John's motion to endorse this concept from the Finance Committee's perspective. Is there any other discussion amongst the committee on it? Colette, would you call the vote?
Yes. Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Counselor Gleisteen,
I'm gonna abstain and think about it just a little bit.
Counselor Calucci.
Yes,
Okay, the motion passes.
thank you. Okay, now we've kept some people waiting for 45 minutes, but I think we're ready to jump into some budget reviews. The first on the agenda is information systems, and I see Mr. Began is here. Tom, do you have any introduction for information systems?
Well, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge IT are the unsung heroes of any organization. They've been really thrust to the forefront over the last year, and our IT staff under Don's leadership has really performed incredibly well. The town was probably the easiest lift. They supported the schools through some of the most challenging and unpredictable times imaginable. So they're certainly due a debt of gratitude for pivoting very quickly and doing incredibly good work seamlessly. So with that, there's nowhere to go but down, Don. So
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate that. All right, so pretty short department budget review, and you can go ahead and start. We provide the shared technology services for both the town and the schools. We use a single team of professionals to develop an efficient meet of needs for the community and the schools. We went into this budget season with 4 key budget priorities. Number 1 was to make better use of what we have. Number 2, improving the user awareness and cybersecurity preparedness. This has really come to the forefront in the last 2 years, but particularly in the last year. Number 3, reduce the known risk factors. We've been putting a lot of effort into exploring, analyzing, monitoring what opportunities there are for reducing our risk factors as an operation on both sides. And then finally, optimizing interoperability, security, and cost effectiveness. And I'll just to explain interoperability real fast. We want our systems to talk to each other so that we're not spending extra money putting systems in the middle to translate between systems. Next. Restoration costs. We made no effort to restore any staffing. We actually maintained the status quo there. On equipment, There are some department requests that were put in, given the fact that we've been eliminating most department requests over the past 3 consecutive years. We do have some significant concerns in regards to public safety and public works. So the budget requests that you'll see in the detail budget are directly related to equipment that's either obsolete, failing on a regular basis, or presents poor performance for staff, and or represents a significant cybersecurity risk. We eliminated all other requests other than the ones that met that criteria. And then training, we eliminated all training and certification renewals last year as part of our budget cuts. And I've asked to restore those so that we can get caught back up. We've made significant changes because of the pandemic. We've introduced a lot of new or upgraded software into the system and made a couple hardware changes, and we don't have the current certifications for my staff to keep up with that. So we're kind of doing a lot of OJT at the moment, and it's really not a good position for an IT staff to be in. We have 2 new initiatives, and they're technically, one of them is an upgrade and the other isn't sort of an upgrade. Munis Online, we're moving Munis from an on-site application stack to an online. We're going to move it to Munis, the Munis cloud services. This will put us in a much better situation long-term. We don't have to purchase and maintain the hardware in-house. We also don't have to necessarily continue to maintain a redundant data center posture. Greatly reduce our cost, time, and effort in that regard. It also gives us a much better disaster recovery and business continuance posture as an organization in the event that something happens within town hall or the public safety building, which are next door to each other and happen to be our redundant site. We also just recently have identified a new website platform. We've had a lot of ongoing feedback that indicates that our current town website that we just rolled out last year just isn't meeting the performance and functionality requirements that our community has. And we've identified a new platform that in our research and analysis really will meet all of those criteria. And we've also, as late as today, confirmed that the school system is also going to move forward on that same platform. We're going to do 2 different development projects so that we're diving into that as 2 separate entities.
Don, if I could just jump in for a moment. If I'm not mistaken, we're actually going to fund this out of the current year budget. Is that right? The FY21 budget?
That's correct. By doing both websites concurrently, one being slower than the other, we're able to negotiate a contract that lets us pay for it out of this year's budget and not have an impact until FY23. So we got a 13-month contract, essentially, and we also saved all of the implementation costs for both organizations by biting off both projects at the same time. The company deferred the implementation costs. So we saved ourselves about $18,000 in implementation costs up front.
And we have full intentions of giving a deep brief, a deep review, I should say, with the communications committee next week. But
correct.
Really excited about the prospects. The other thing worth mentioning, Don, is that we do have money in this budget for what's called Board Doc software. And that's it's a software system that will help manage our public meetings. And I think we'll be able to use that for all boards and committees. And it really should revolutionize a lot of that. I think it will be well received. It's a product we've looked at in the past and really think it's time to move this forward.
Yeah, and I'll follow up with that, Tom. Board Docs is a product we looked at last year and simply weren't able to fund due to the significance of the budget cuts we made. But the this past year has really illustrated the need to be able to electronically archive and search for documents, both for the council and the Board of Education, as well as all of the different associated committees and the individual documents, and be able to do word search for individual words within those documents. And so this is going to really break out our archive and search capabilities from the website content search. So we're going to separate those two functions. And by doing that, I think we end up with a much richer opportunity there for our community to be able to find the information that they may want to seek. Even in, for example, this current budget process, when we go into budget next year, we'll have a much richer search and retrieval process in place with board docs.
Don, what's the website platform?
The website platform is called Finalsite. You can find it at finalsite.com.
Thank you. I'm excited to hear that.
Yeah, and it's a very recent development. We've been researching this for easily 6 months, and it's just been in the last week that I've been able to make a solid recommendation after all of that research and get everybody to move forward. John?
Yeah. Do you mind just talking a little bit about what this one does better than what we have today? Because I know there's been concerns that have been brought up about the website, mostly around the search capability. So I'm just curious, like what are the big benefits the community or we're going to get by moving to this new platform?
So it's a great question. And the simple answer is content management, which is a component of the search. If you don't have good content management and the ability to tag information correctly, then you can't have a good search capability. So that is something that Finalsite does far better. Also, we do have a lot of feedback related to navigation. It's got some outstanding navigation tools, and the style and format capabilities, the flexibility there that this tool or platform allows us is far more flexible than the tool where we basically had to do it ourselves. And we found a lot of constraints that where the tool just simply didn't allow us to do certain things that people asked us to do, but we weren't able to make it happen. So
If
this
you're
is
interested in seeing a site, I would direct you to West Hartford, Connecticut. That's a site that uses Frontline just to get a sense of look, feel. And the other advantage of having both town and school on the same platform, it certainly helps Don and his team on the back end. But I assure you the look, feel will be noticeably different between the two. So there'll be very clear differentiation between the two, still built on the same platform. There's a lot of customization that we can and will work with.
Councilor Gleistein.
Yeah, so I know, I mean, this isn't all about the website, but so the software or the platform, are we going to have to increase staff to support it, or is our in-house staff, say Tody and Colette and those, is it going to be an easier platform for them to be able to actually post things? Because I know that's one thing we've looked at before, other, as opposed to having to send it to somebody who has to do it, which takes a resource. And then I guess my other question on it was, what are the annual maintenance costs of the new system? And I only ask that because I think people, should be aware, folks want all this technology and it's great. And they want good communication tools, and they do cost money. They're not free. So those are my two questions. And my comment is, I think the combined school town IT department is it works great. And, I'd love to see it, where could we explore this kind of combining of services, across through other departments, because I think this particular department is, a model of how, these things give us some efficiencies that end up saving the whole town money. So I think it's I think it works really well. And of course, we're looking at a bottom line here, but the school pays us back for half of what you do is what I think, quote unquote, pays us back. It's all the bottom line anyway. But yeah, so those are my first two questions, and my last one was just a comment.
Okay, well, thank you for the comment. And to answer the questions, so the first question is the easy answer for that one is that we will be able to. Okay, so Councilor Gleason, could you rephrase the first question?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I'm just trying to see if the staff that need to have things posted
Right.
on the web will have a more direct, will they be able to be trained, or is that, I guess where I'm going is, or next year we're going to say, well, we need a second webmaster. I get, so what's the labor involved, I guess, with maintaining the new system?
So one of the key that is an outstanding question, because one of the key aspects that we looked at in our analysis was maintaining our current staff and not increasing staff. So we looked at a number of different platforms, and this one was one that presented us with the opportunity to do much, much more with our current resources. It also came in, to answer your second question, it came in at a very reasonable price. The one that, the platform that we looked at first, which is one that's used by a number of municipalities in Maine called Civic Plus, was going to cost us, depending on how we configured it, somewhere between $45,000 and $90,000. This one's going to cost us about $16,000, sorry. So when we looked at the balance of performance and functionality, reliability, and cost, as well as end user functionality, Ken Collette, Tody, and the 25 other content managers that need to be able to get in on a daily basis, can they do that with a limited amount of training and still have a wide array of functions that they can perform? This is the one that floated clearly to the top. For example, with Civic Plus, which costs so much more, but many municipalities use, they don't have IT departments. They don't have content managers. They don't have a webmaster. They don't have an Allison doing a lot of the messaging and community outreach. And so what they do is they type it up in a Word document or a Google document, and they ship it off to Civic Plus, and then they put it in a ticket, and it gets done when they get it done. So that was a huge differentiator for us, was looking at what that workflow looked like. Because I clearly heard that, Brian clearly heard that from the communications committee, is how do we get to the end as quick as possible and do it accurately so that we're able to communicate with our community and do so quick, do so correctly. And we hear the same message from the schools. And we need to be able to turn things, obviously with the COVID alerts and everything with children and quarantining and everything, we got to be able to turn those messages around pretty much within 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So we learned a lot in the last year about what it really means to be able to communicate. And we took all of that we possibly could and plugged it into an evaluation matrix. And this is what spit out the other end, and clearly took the prize.
That's excellent. Yeah, this team gets a lot done. Yeah, so that's great.
Thank you. Liam? Moving towards the budget goal, we did not see that we had any opportunities to move any closer to the budget goal. I take a zero-based budgeting approach to pretty much everything. So we only budgeted what was needed to continue to operate. Again, go back to our budget priorities, doing more with what we already have. To some extent, there's some interpretation in there. In some cases, we need to do more with what we have, but we also need to enhance what we have from the standpoint of consolidating it or improving on the product itself so that people can use the full package better. And then that's where the Munis Online comes in. That's where the website comes in. We have a website. We want to make it better. We have Munis, but we want to make it better. but it's not taking away from the core purpose. Liam?
Don, were there some switches last year that we didn't end up buying, or, so memory may not serve me correct, I don't have last year's budget, but it seemed like there was some technical, something you needed last year that maybe didn't get funded.
We actually did manage to purchase those. We
Okay.
found another supplier that was able to slide us in at the budget point. That was one of those. I went to them and said, I'm a poor public servant and this is all I have. What can you do for us?
Okay, great. I was looking for it. I didn't see them again, so that's good. They're
Yeah.
done. All right. Thank you.
We saved about 2 cents. We had about 2 cents left over. So, budget cut impacts. We've talked a little bit about that. Basically, we did have some difficulties navigating a plethora of changes that occurred because of the pandemic. We managed to overcome virtually every one of them. My team is super creative. They're nerdy and they have a dry sense of humor, but they're also really creative. And so I was very impressed with what they were able to do, and also the patience that people extended to my team in order to be able to get things done and maybe do it in a way that that people weren't expecting right out of the gate. We did have an increased number of equipment failures that improved over time. That was more so on the school side. We were able to replace equipment. We used some of the federal funding to replace equipment. It took a long time to get it in. It wasn't like we were the only people ordering laptops, for example. So we waited a good 6 months for some of that to come in. And then we pretty much burned through all of our spare parts and equipment for departments because we had so many people working remote that we hadn't anticipated. We eventually caught up with that as well. I won't say out loud that we probably borrowed some equipment from one organization and passed it to the other temporarily while we waited. And the certifications and training, as I mentioned, they're becoming more misaligned with where we're at today versus where we were last year. Liam? And that's it.
How many
Happy.
devices are you guys supporting now?
We are just laptops alone. We're supporting, I think we're supporting over 3,600. And total devices on the network, that's including switches and wireless access points and anything else that's got blinky lights, printers and all that. We're close to 6,000 with 5 people in the field.
I have a question, and maybe it's more for Tom or Liam. What is our remote work policy, and I guess how has COVID changed it? Because I know a lot of companies right now are kind of revisiting working from home, and I know that's probably not the case for a lot of staff, but just curious, what are we doing at the town? Because I've heard of space constraints before in the town, and are we allowing certain folks to be able to work remotely, and is that helping us kind of with the space constraints as we staff up?
Yeah, I can field that one. So obviously this last spring we did push as many people remote as possible. Obviously a lot of what we do in municipal government can't be done remotely. We can't have police patrol remotely or EMS or public works, or so we're somewhat limited, but the staff who do have the ability to be productive remotely, we've largely continued up until this point. We have a number of staff, and by number, I mean percentage-wise, it's probably, certainly less than 10% of our workforce that has that capacity and ability. But we've still entertained some hybrid, some days in the office, some days from home, while we kind of work through the vaccination piece. And but I do think that municipal government's pretty slow to change. I think that there's some openness to what that looks like in the future, but we haven't pulled everyone back by any means. And as long as things are working and being productive, we're willing to entertain what that balance looks like.
And for my part, we're in the customer service business, so I think Liam's probably right. 90% of our folks really need to be here to do their jobs. I, for one, have been really comforted to see how that works and what happens to productivity. Frankly, I think those that are working from home are working harder than they would be if they were here in many respects. So personally, my reservations about productivity and such are really gone. And so I think we do need to revisit those policies where it makes sense.
Great, thanks, guys.
It's probably not opportune moment, but I think I'll take the opportunity. Don has been with us for just about 2 years. This week, he advised that he has found some other opportunities and will be pursuing those. So I guess I want to take the opportunity to make you all aware of that and certainly thank him publicly for his service to the town and for the team that he's built and the organization he's built. We're much better for it, Don. Thank you.
Good luck to you, Don, and thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sorry I had to step away for a few seconds there. But I'm back now, and it looks like Ruth with finance is up next.
All right, Ruth.
Here we go. So yes, the finance department budget, we can skip to the next page. And in the budget, it talks about the finance department, including the accounting office, revenue office, and the assessing office. However, I'm pulling assessing out and letting Nick handle that piece of it. It's pretty much just for budget purposes that he's included. So he's on his own. So as an overview for the finance department, as you can see, roughly 88% of our total costs for the revenue and accounting offices are staffing costs. The rest, the other 12%, is operational. And as a point of note, really 95% of our budget is financed from non-property tax revenues. So a bulk of it comes from the excise taxes that we collect to help fund the revenue office. The rest are other revenues for like license plate fees and hunting and fishing and investment revenues. So a good portion of our revenues are covered, of our budget is covered by these revenues. And, we're responsible for handling essentially $100 million budget of revenues, $100 million of expenditures. There are a multitude of purchase orders and journal transfers and things of that nature. So roughly the staff are handling quite a bit of in and out in terms of funding and revenues and expenditures. Within that, just like the IT department, the finance department also assists and works with the school department. We handle all of their check printing for them. We report mostly, except for main retirement, we report to W-2s, that the Affordable Care Act reporting, the quarterly reports for the federal and the state. We handle all of that with the school department, for the school department. So we do work together with them on that. And we used to charge them for our time, but somewhere along the line, they stopped getting reimbursed for that as well. So we just charge them for our supplies that we use for them. It comes to about $1,500. And so, yep, restoration costs so about $9,100 are non-wage related costs for to restore us back. The professional development, the training is at this point still not fully restored, but we're trying to make a little bit of an impact in the adjustments that Tom put forward. We did show a reduction of $2,400 roughly. We were going to have some on-site training at other locations, but they pushed that back again, so we won't have the travel and the hotel rooms and stuff. So we were able to make that savings. And the next slide. So under new initiatives, and I'm not 100% sure that this is should be called new initiatives, but as it shows that the average age of this finance staff is almost 60 years old. So we have a lot of staff who are walking towards the retirement door. And so we need to try and retain or to succeed with planning for when these folks do leave. One of the things that we're also finding is that with these new GASB Governmental Accounting Standards Board rulings, that we're beginning to need more and more technical staff. And right now there was just the deputy finance director and myself. So that, made it a little bit more difficult to try and get things done. So what we did this year was we had an account clerk leave, and so we refined that position a little bit. I think I mentioned this to some of you anyway, and turned that into an accountant position. So that provides a third person to help us with those accounting requirements. The only problem I have is that my deputy finance director has given her notice to retire. And so we're going to be back down to 2. So we're in a hiring process right now for that. And I think the hope is that we'll be able to start as folks leave. The staff in the finance department have been here a minimum of 10 to 40 years. So there's a lot of history. There's a lot of historical knowledge, if you will, that, when these folks leave, we're going to be losing. So that's kind of a sad piece to note, but hopefully we'll get folks in who can take over and do what needs to be done. So next slide. The only thing we have in the budget that I would call maybe discretionary is for the past 3 years, we've been trying to replace the conference room chairs. They're either handoffs from other department staff who didn't want to sit in them anymore, or they're from the original purchase back in 1993. So this is a goal that we're trying to at least have them all be the same size chair, the same similar kind of looking chairs. Right now they're different all around. So that's one thing we could do. In terms of budget cut impacts, we found last year between March and June, I don't know if you were able to see back in May when we reopened, the lines were out the door, down the hallway. I mean, they're just like huge. And the staff were only working 20 hours a week. We did up them to 24, but still, and they were only open 3 days a week. So, it took longer to do things. And while most of the people who were coming in, while most of the folks could re-register their vehicles online, most of the people who were coming in could not do that. New vehicles, change of address, things of that nature, they had to come in. And that's what caused the line. So we saw, if nothing else, that people are buying new vehicles or they're moving into town. So those are the reasons that would affect us in the future if we had to cut back on staffing. Also, most of the, we couldn't say, okay, we can still do our work at 20 hours. We did just what had to be done, which meant that the federal reportings that we had to do, those got done, but a lot of the internal workings that we needed to do, such as audit, bank reconciliations, all of those things got pushed because it was really the outside mandates that drove what we did during that time. And, it did take a toll on the staff, and that I think is probably one of the biggest things that we've seen. And they're still, even now, even though they say they're caught up and they're able to do this work, I think it's still affecting them a little bit. So, and then that's pretty much us. So if there are any questions.
I have maybe one question, Ruth. Knowing that we're going to be doing an RFP for a new, or for the auditor, are you considering any increased expenses for that for next year as part of your budget, just in case we go with a different auditor through the RFP process, or are you just assuming the same cost we're paying our current vendor today?
The only thing, excuse me, the money we have in the budget for next year covers FY21's audit. So we kind of have a price for that for this year, so we know what it is. It will be the FY23 budget that may show some additional costs or reduced costs maybe.
Great, thanks.
Incidentally, I just saw in my listserv with managers, RKO, which is one of the larger firms in the state that do larger communities, are actually backing out of their contracts and dropping the municipal public sector clients. So that field of auditors is likely to get even smaller when we go back out to RFP, but wish us luck.
So Ruth, do you anticipate any software changes or software upgrades? So the Munis, how's that going to affect your resources, or is that going to be pretty transparent for your staff?
It it should be pretty transparent as long as the online portion, you know, doesn't fail. Right now it's all in-house, so it makes it easier for us, you know, things don't break down here, but when it's over the internet, if you will, or the cloud, I don't have the technical terms, there's potential that we could lose connections, I guess. So that's my biggest concern, but I know of other communities that have this and they don't have those issues, so.
Councillor Gleisteen, we have over a series of years moved all technology, both hardware and software, into the IT budget. Through the years, each department, to one degree or another, had purchases, and just that decentralization, as you might expect, caused some problems.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those costs for software, hardware, licensing, and the like is now in the IT budget.
And we put our requests into the IT department if we want to buy some software or something.
Well,
But we don't have that any intentions for next year to do that.
it looks, you know, really prudent to be trying to think ahead and plan for the retirements. So that's excellent, you know, that you are all, you know, thinking that way for the long-term stability of the town. So and I mean, you were able to kind of find some training that was local, but you know, that where you didn't have to include the travel. So it's you know, it was also good to have that reminder about all the times that you guys were shut down and all the things. I remember you talking about this at some point, saying, well, we've only got this small staff doing this. So, you know, we did talk a lot about, okay, the audit didn't happen till whatever, but you know, it's good to have that reminder that we were largely shut down with a lot of staff not here doing some of those pieces that have to be done to get that audit work out. So it was a very helpful presentation.
Yeah, I agree with that, Betsy. I think I got a much better feel for the impact the pandemic had on the finance department. I mean, if you look at your excise tax revenues for this year, right, they're well exceeding what you would forecast or your expectations, but you only had a much smaller window to accomplish all that work. And the same kind of holds true for just about everything else that you did, because a lot of your staff is in person or got furloughed, and you have to focus your efforts during those times. So thank you and your staff for chugging along, plugging through. And if there's something we can do, even if it's something as small as replacing the conference room chairs, please do that. And I appreciate the gesture and the offer of that, but I would support keeping those in the budget right now. Yeah. Thank you.
Just one other piece in terms of the burdens we place on finance. You may recall the budget process last year was certainly interesting, kind of fast and furious at the end. A lot of what the finance committee did and the council was looking at kind of aggregate changes. But I assure you there is great detail behind all that. And so Ruth and her staff, depleted as they were, had to kind of untangle all of that and piece it back all together. So all of those things together caused, you know, a real challenging year.
It looks like you're up on it this year because we have detail for all of the proposed changes at this point, which is fantastic. Any other questions for Ruth? Thank you very much.
Thank
Next up, we have assessing, and Nick Cloutier is here.
Thanks. I'm happy to present for the assessing department. If you want to go to the next slide, thanks. So the overview, I have our functions and duties in assessing. I won't go through all of them to save time, but I view what we do is not only essential because it provides the framework for raising property taxes, but even more so because we have to do that work in a manner that's in accordance with the law. So it's all required duties. And for that reason, we have to meet a lot of certain deadlines and reporting to the state, and the amount of accuracy as well as fairness and equitability we are able to do our duties with. It really increases the benefits to the town in relationship to this department. So we put our best efforts always forward. And conversely, if we weren't to do our very best, there are potential exposure for abatements or legal issues. So we take our job quite seriously, and we try to do it on a pretty minimal budget. Like has been mentioned by other departments, the majority of our costs are staff and benefits. The remaining that's not is only 6% of our proposed budget. And I would say at least half, if not more than that, the 6% are required costs. They're built in, like the cost of our deeds at the Cumberland County Registry of Deeds are a fixed cost, more or less, as are things like publications we subscribe to keep up to date on the cost of building and structural models for our data systems. So we really don't have too many costs that are actually discretionary. And our goal is always to maintain a high level of service and improve whenever possible. In the past year, and let's say year and a half since I've been the assessor total, I've tried my best to have not only the good work done, but raising the level of communication so that the types of things that we do are as transparent as possible with the public through documentation and presentations to the council. Restoration costs, as I've alluded to, we're already a pretty lean department budget. And from fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 21, we were able to make some cuts, as were all departments. And we cut about 32% of our discretionary spending that wasn't payroll last year. That amounted between 9,000 or 10,000, depending which budget lines you account for. And in the proposed fiscal year 22 budget, we're asking for 5,500 of that back. So about 50% or so. And then in the last go around of what Tom presented in the opening tonight, that number has been reduced. We've been able to make further cuts from that restoration ask down to less than $4,000. So we're only asking for about a third of the cuts that we made previously back this year. So we're trying our best not to restore everything that we were able to cut, just get it up to where we need it so we can have the training and travel and equipment costs that we did cut up to a more usable number for this coming fiscal year budget. The new initiative that I've tried to be out in front of for several months is that we're requesting for a fourth full-time staff position in assessing. So this is not a brand new position, it's replacing a part-time position. We currently have 3 full-time staff and 1 part-time hourly staff that's in about less than half time. And we're hoping to get that up to 4 full-time staff. I've tried to outline this not only in our December 2nd meeting that I had with council about future revaluations and how I think a 4th staff person would be required for that purpose in order to occur. But also I put an exhibit in the budget book on page 124 in which I outlined not only is that future task a reason for a 4th full-time staff person, I strongly believe that the town of Scarborough perhaps should have had 4 already for our existing tasks. And we're only able to function with the level of staffing we have now because we work at our absolute best levels. But even then, with the evolving workload and needs of the town in recent years, with new development in town being quite robust, 4 full-time staff just to do the necessary work has become an important addition to our staff, I believe. As I said in this slide that I created, let's say a couple of weeks ago, I was thinking the only opportunities I could find to easily move toward budget goals, aka reductions, would be maybe about $1,000. I was able to offer up about $1,700 in this recent go around. So even more than that, like I alluded to, it's mostly training cost or also something contracted services, which is, I can explain, but it's kind of an insurance policy, if you will. If we have to hire an outside appraiser for a very specific purpose, some years we don't need to use it, but when you do, it needs to be there, and it's a small amount. And then I put not advisable for deferring the new position that I've outlined. It wouldn't be a full reduction. Say this position wouldn't be passed along in the budget. It wouldn't just reduce that line item. The part-time position in my mind would have to come back. So the net change would only save about $48,000. And I think the payoff of having that full-time position is more than worth that, as I hope to align and explain in the budget exhibit, as our current staff is becoming inadequate for the workload and complexity of our town. And I believe it would jeopardize the revaluation plans to be handled in-house moving forward. And it's, I believe, very important that we get on track with the possibility of doing that in future years as soon as possible. And it's a multi-year process to prepare for such an event. As for budget cut impacts in the past year, fortunately, none of the required or essential tasks or tasks that were service to the public were affected. We made those the absolute priority, the essential tasks and tasks that affected the public. So they were all done and done well. We did lose our part-time staff member as a result of furloughing. She wasn't able to come back and she got a position elsewhere. And then we were not able to have that position filled for a number of months. And then some projects and training and equipment had to be deferred. But we were able to do some of our training online, which is actually less cost than going somewhere. And we'll try our best to continue that method as much as possible. And I was also able to work more hours than I might normally to cover for people being furloughed or part-time. I'm happy to do that when necessary, but it's nice when it's not necessary to do, because the fresher I am to do the workload in let's say a 45-hour week would be great. But I was putting in probably 50 to 55 hours when we had people furloughed to make sure the work got done on time.
Thank you, Nick. Well, I guess I'll start off. I wasn't aware that we lost a part-time position. So is that something you've deferred trying to fill pending how the budget turns out?
Nope, we were able to fill that in late November. So we've had that position filled since, but there were a number of months when it was furloughed and the person chose not to come back, that the position was vacant.
Okay.
And just a further note, another reason for the part-time to full-time, I think the field of assessing, there's a lot of people that are aging out of the profession, so a lot of job opportunities in other towns. So if you are lucky enough to fill someone in the position at the administrative and you're willing to put in the time to teach them the profession, it's very likely that if you don't have a hiring path from within, that they'll leave within a year. And I wouldn't blame them for that. Once they know, the basics of assessing, they can get the next position up. So every time you lose someone in a staff to that phenomenon, myself or someone else would probably need to take over the workload, or it will be a domino effect that everyone's taking over the work below them. So everyone's working harder or unable to do the non-required tasks until the position is refilled and then retrained. And then it all happens again. With 4 full-time staff, you have the ability to keep those people, retain them longer, or train from within so they're able to raise up if somebody were to leave in that scenario.
Thank you. Go ahead, John.
Nick, I just want to say, I think you did probably one of the best jobs on your business case in the budget book for the additional FTE. I thought it was really clear and really well justified. So, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. I guess my question, it's not so much about the budget, but going back to the presentation you did back in the fall, do we have that as a committed plan that we're going to be doing reevaluations? What was it, every 3 years going forward with in-house support? Is that something that requires a council action to say that's our new plan going forward? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. When we spoke about that back in December, that was my proposal. It is not taken on any actualization at this point. And that was just what I would view as an advisable path forward. Before we make anything set in stone, I would discuss further with Tom and then counsel accordingly. But I would advise certainly more frequently, whether it's 3 years or 4 years. Other towns are starting to follow suit, and there's plenty of reasoning why having it regular and done in-house as much as possible would be beneficial to the town.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, that pretty much answered my question, because I think, you've done an excellent job, with that presentation in December, really kind of laying out what this plan would look like. And then I think, for the council to get, more educated on, what does it mean? Because, right now we're in a housing boom, you sometimes have booms, you sometimes have busts, so there's things that, just change the whole scene. So this ability to have the in-house assessing and to be able to kind of react to the conditions, it sounds on its face like a good idea. I do think the council should explore it a lot more, but I think too, I agree with Councilor Anderson. You've made the case for expanding that part-time to full-time position with just what we're doing right now. And just with the town growing and things like that. So in your year-end reports are fantastic. So I just wanted to, your August commitment report are really, really, really useful and very helpful. I talked to a number of residents who pull them frequently and just reread them. So the big thank you on those. Those are great. So I really don't have questions. I think I'm glad that you were able to find a $4,400 savings off the that's great. Do you guys have to maintain, what is your official certifications that you state? What's your state requirements that you have to maintain? And I will be listening, but I've got to plug in my cord, so my camera is going to go off for a second.
Sure. We have what's called a certified Maine assessor. That's our primary certification. There are other delineations beyond that, but that's the one you need to be an assessor. You need at least one of those ideally in your office. We have 3, fortunately. All 3 full-time members are that delineation, and that allows us all to do a lot of the aspects of work that sometimes in a given office maybe only one person can do. And then beyond that, there's levels of 1, 2, 3, 4. based on how many courses you've taken, and there's national level delineations and designations that are very costly to get, but I'm sure I could work towards if it interests the council.
Yeah, and I guess I have one more potential suggestion. You can just think it over. The fire chief is, he produces analysis of the size of our town, the number of calls and the number, and compares the staff with some of the towns around. I find that analysis, to be very helpful because it shows, it shows residents what we're accomplishing with the size of the staff that we have and all of the work, the number of calls that we're doing. So it's sometimes, because you clearly lay out these cases really well, if you ever have that one, that would be very interesting to compare. When you say we're lean, I would assume then if you're looking at, comparing us to South Portland, Portland's assessing staff, I can't remember. I looked at the number not too long ago. That might be another interesting thing to put in your packet, like the fire chief does. He does a great job on that, and number of lieutenants we have versus other times. I think it's very helpful information for residents to understand how all we do deliver that service.
Yeah, Nick, you have my support as well for that extra half FTE, and it's really a testament to the skills that you bring to the position as well. To think that we'd be able to do in-house revaluations with only adding a half FTE. We couldn't even do a revaluation. We couldn't afford to without having to get voter approval to do it all in one shot a couple of years ago. So that's a remarkable transformation or progress to me. And it's the right thing to do. It's the most equitable thing to do. So,
and do recall that last reval was about a $500,000 investment for an outside firm. So keep that in mind as we're talking about staff investments. Just the other thing I want to mention, Nick, I believe we're the third highest value community. Is that correct?
In my documentation, I placed this as the fourth highest, but we're essentially tied for second place with York and South Portland. It's a matter of millions when we're talking billions. So we're essentially second place with South Portland and York, far behind Portland.
Right. It's worth noting though, for the size community, certainly to Councillor Gleison's point, the number of parcels is an indicator of workload, but also the makeup of our tax base. Unlike York, we have a fair degree, 23 or 24% commercial industrial. That requires another level of expertise and experience. So there's a great deal of complexity that sits in behind the workload as well.
perfect. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Next up, we have the planning department. And Jay, I don't know what you're doing with your background, but it's really cool. You're gonna have to teach us. You look like you're in space.
Can you hear me at this point?
Yes.
No.
Excellent. Yeah, it's I went with the blurred background, and of course, just as it's my turn, my computer's to glitch. Wonderful. I still have Nick frozen on the screen. That's okay. I'm hoping you can still hear me.
We can hear you just fine. Yeah.
All right, great. I'm going to pull up my own PowerPoint here because I'm not seeing what Liam's putting up. So sorry, I'm home and under quarantine, so I have been working from the office, but I was one of the first. I had a first contact, and but all seemingly well. Had my 2 shots, just didn't have the 2 weeks behind me. So anyway, with that, so I'll start with the overview of our budget. I'll start really with an overview of our department. We're made up of 3 divisions, our planning, our codes, and our technical division. We really serve the town in a very wide range of ways.
Jay, you just dropped off. You're on, yeah, your phone.
Okay, can you hear me now?
You can.
That's weird. I didn't touch the phone and it muted itself. So I was just starting to go over just real quickly our 3 divisions of our department: planning, codes, and technical. We really work among and throughout the various departments, particularly through our technical department. Planning, as I think we've experienced recently, we really do a lot of work around planning for growth and development, transportation, as well as natural resource conservation. Just also think of sort of piping clover work that we do, or watershed management planning. So I guess just a way of quick overview, our total expenses are about 1.2 million. Total revenues, roughly $750,000. That's largely from building, plumbing, and electrical permits. As we'll talk about in just a few moments here, our total restoration in this proposed budget is about $10,000. And so taken together, our net budget is about $460,000. I could talk about our restoration costs next here, assuming you're seeing those. Largely last year, you know, when we looked to make some budget adjustments, really was in the area of training. And so we're looking to reestablish that to the tune of $8,000. A lot of our, or pretty much all of our department carries annual certifications and professional accreditations that need to be annually worked on, and you need to get certain professional trainings in throughout a year. Hopefully moving forward, you know, there'll continue to be virtual opportunities, though we are already seeing some of them moving back to in-person. So we are looking to bring some of those fundings back, and then general office supplies. We also are looking to restore moving forward. Our new initiatives, we have two main new initiatives. One is of course, I'm glitching again here, engineering technical position. This would be our technician position. This is a net of $74,277. I say a net because there is an offsetting revenue line. Some of what this position will be able to do is help the town be more efficient and timely and effective in our site, our construction site compliance and review, be able to stay ahead of potential issues and to address compliance issues sooner. These are things that we currently have third parties do, and those are paid for by the by developers. So that's the offsetting revenue line that you're seeing. We've made some estimations of what type of revenues we would get from having our own staff person doing the work. The technician will also help us address unfunded mandates that are coming down as part of our MS4 permitting. This is the stormwater permitting that I know our town engineer does an annual report out to council, and over the last number of years has really forecasted that this is coming, and we are now going to be issued our new permit, and there's a lot more that's being pushed down to the towns to do that. Frankly, we will need to have additional help to do, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. And so in addition to those two things, having this position will really free up in-house staff, the planning director, myself, town engineer, and others to focus our energies elsewhere that we contract out for services, where we sort of have to spend time putting out certain immediate fires that hopefully this position will help us do, so we can focus our attention on some other elements. And I just note that this really does align with neighboring communities in terms of staffing. And you can see here the different communities that are listed between Saco, South Portland, Westbrook, Biddeford, Gorham, Wyndham. They either have stormwater compliance coordinators, assistant engineers, or what have you. And so So that's one of our new initiatives, and the other is new equipment. The plotter in our planning department is to say it's on the fritz is putting it kindly, and so we're looking to replace that. So my next slide here that I'm seeing is opportunities to move towards budget goals. And really what I've done is tried to break this out into what I might recommend that we could handle and what I think might not be such a good idea. Certainly, I think revenues had an opportunity since March when this was submitted to take a look at our fee structure. And so we identified an additional $133,000 in fees. I'll talk about the details of that in a future slide here. And so I'd recommend we do that. And I could see a delay in the equipment purchase, though it would, we wouldn't be as efficient. We do have, we've been surviving, and we can probably get through another year if we must. So again, just recognizing that, council appreciate that you're looking to move towards a budget goal. Looking at our new initiatives, of course, we have the engineering technician position. I think that would really be a loss to the community in a lot of ways if we weren't able to maintain that position. And I guess what I wanted to note was the footnote I have here is that, and you'll notice I referenced this as a $54,000 reduction. That's because of the because of the new MS4 permitting and the things that the additional work we know we're going to need to do. Should we lose this position, our department would come forward with an additional $20,000 in contracted services to be able to help with some essential work that needs to be done through those mandates. So here's a detail of the proposed increased revenues. You can see we were able to take a look at our building permit revenues at $125,000. Really the fee structure that we're putting in place would align again with our neighboring communities. One of the other things, as we just went through, council well knows, the repeal and replace of the GMO. There's a lot of administrative work there that needs to be done with accounting for all types of units, not just those that are getting growth permits, but because of all the exemptions, we really need to have a pretty robust system. And so what we're looking at is a per unit fee, which would net the town about $7,500. And then we're looking to increase modestly our private way fees, and that would net the town about an additional $1,000. In terms of the decrease in expenditures, I identified the reduction in the new equipment, pretty self-explanatory. The detriment there might be delays in customer service, inefficiency, but overall, I think that's the least of, I think that the bigger impact to customer service would be the reduction of the engineering technician position. Really, I think, should we lose that position, we would have a reduction in our efficiency for stormwater compliance, delays in our construction site inspection, delays in resolution of the site construction compliance. And that's not just, seeing a problem and then getting that problem fixed. It's being able to anticipate future problems and have those conversations with the developer or site contractor so that you don't wind up with issues. And so having that person on staff and in town, we believe is going to be a great benefit. And it would reduce the stress on current staff in terms of trying to stay on top of the issues. I think, council is familiar with, there's been a couple emails, at least one or two to council I've seen recently with a construction site in town. And I'll say, that's, while that one is certainly elevated, that is not uncommon. Most construction sites, staff gets those type of concerns, complaints, and we respond and stay on top of as best we can. But construction certainly, I think, construction activity always raises questions. And so again, we do our best to anticipate those and manage those where we can. And this position will really go a long way to meeting what we think resident expectations are based on the type of communications we have. My last slide before we get to questions really here is about budget cut impacts. And so the impacts from the 21 reductions that we went through last year really had to do with training and certification maintenance. I think I mentioned pretty much all our staff has annual certifications or professional development they need to maintain. Just as I mentioned, where there's looking for some restoration in terms of office supplies. So really that's just general office administration. And then I think, it was already been said by other department heads, but some of those reductions, which aren't really reflected in the budget we're talking about here, but really around sort of the staffing, really put a lot of stress and fatigue on staff, and just those that didn't go through the furlough, really putting in the extra time to be sure that the department maintained the level that our residents expected. And those that even were furloughed I know they put in extra time because they value their job and want to be sure the residents are getting what they expect. So with that, I'm at my questions and discussion slide. So
Thank you, Jay. John, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Just a quick question. In the technician position, you had kind of a sub-bullet on a reduction in outsourced services. I wonder if you could just quantify that. Like what's the reduction? Is that tied into the 20,000 increase we would have to do, or are there other outsourced support that we would no longer be doing with that position?
Yeah, so I think, it's different than that $20,000 that I would come back to you with. Really what I was thinking when I talked about a reduction in contracted services, I think a good example I can use that just jumps to my mind is we're currently, we have an approved CIP from I think 2 years ago for some work up in North Scarborough, that intersection, sort of the triangle up there. That's, we're in final design. And frankly, there's some work that our town engineer could do in-house, but just simply doesn't have the time or capacity to do. And so we're really having to work with our engineering services or outside engineering services to finalize some plans. And so I think, so it's a little hard to exactly quantify what those trade-offs are, but it's really about those type of trade-offs. And so, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Are those things that happen frequently and often, or are they kind of far and few between?
I would say frequently and often. It's a lot of the public works projects. So I talked about how our department, we really work across every department, particularly our technical division, our town engineer, sustainability coordinator, work very closely with Public Works. And so all the capital improvements in the Public Works projects, or when Public Works is in a roadway, sometimes, you need to have an engineer on site doing certain inspections. And so oftentimes, rather than having our town engineer out on site, we have to hire a third party to come and sort of inspect, the sort of details that are happening. Or to make field adjustments, right? It's a town engineer or an engineer who needs to make a determination about, some field adjustments, which are very typical as part of any construction project. And so it's really a matter of time and capacity and resources to be able to get to those items where we're trying to manage and triage all the various responsibilities.
Okay. Great. And then one other comment, and maybe Tom, this is more for you, and it's just been a recurring theme I feel like I've been hearing throughout today around training, and I appreciate the reduction you proposed earlier that had about 60 grand that included, I think, some training reductions. It just seems like maybe restoring that back especially in general government, especially because of all of the credentialing and work that's needed. I mean, I don't think it's a huge amount, but it feels like that would be something we should reconsider. And then just hearing Ruth too, talking about, you know, satisfaction, employee satisfaction, I think training and development is a good way to kind of help with that and retention. And so I would be supportive of potentially kind of revisiting that again to see if we can maybe keep that back where it was originally.
Fair point. I appreciate you bringing it up. You know, I didn't direct staff as to where to make those cuts, but undoubtedly training is impacted. So between now and your next meeting, I can take a look back at that and identify what part of that 66,000 is training related.
Go ahead,
That'd be
Betsy.
great.
So Jay, the 74 for the new position, is that all in with benefits and salary? And so I think we explained before, whenever you guys put something out, it's the all-in cost for the whole year, or is it that annualized, or is that a whole year cost?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Liam.
yeah, it's the full year cost less the revenue we're associating with it. So the full anticipated cost is about 99,000 less the 25 in revenue.
Okay, and where are we getting that 25 in revenue again? That's from the,
We're essentially going to bring some contracted engineering services in-house.
okay. And so
Right now we're passed through and we're going to take that on.
Yeah, developers are paying.
technical engineering services, is that the part of the line items that you're talking? Because it was like 80 something in 2019 and now it's 47. Is that the reduction you're talking about?
No, there should be an additional revenue under Jay's revenues that
Okay,
reflects
and the revenue.
25,000 that was never established prior to.
Those
So-
services are currently being paid for by the developers to a third-party engineer that we direct. So
Okay,
we're talking about if we have our staff doing it, we therefore are eligible to charge that same fee and collect it.
gotcha. So on page
It-
1, what are those technical engineering services?
I'm sorry, which
Could you-
page?
Page
Yeah,
161?
Do you see them, Jay?
It's uploading on my computer. I think it's going to take a moment or two. I have 161 up, but it's a black page right now, or a blank page.
So there are
It'll
two line
populate-
items there for technical and engineering services. One of them is just labeled engineering, and the proposed budget was 17,000. And the other one's engineering reimbursable, and it's 30,000.
Okay, yep. Okay, great, thank you. Yep, no, I appreciate that. So let's see, let's talk, I'll take the reimbursable one first, and Ruth may even chime in on this a little bit. This is actually a balancing fund or account, as I understand it. It's not actual monies that we need to raise. These are funds that I believe are paid back as part of the inspection services. But I guess, Ruth, do you have it at the tip of your tongue what that is? Because it's always been a little baffling to me, because I know we have a corresponding revenue of $30,000, so they sort of wash each other out.
Somewhere along the line that line was created, and there was an offsetting revenue. So the money coming in is the money going out. However, over the years, as I've come to understand exactly what that line is for, it really is more of a liability or an accounts receivable, because we're spending the money, but we're turning around and charging it to the developer or whoever, and then they reimburse us. So it's really, we're expending the money first and then they're reimbursing us. So it's really, to me, it doesn't even belong in the budget, because it's self-balancing. It's like either in a receivable or payable, whichever way it goes. But over time, the account should go to zero. The problem we're seeing is that we budget 30,000, we may actually spend 60,000 this year, but we don't get the revenues of 60,000 till next year. So it's kind of a confusing thing.
So this
So,
is related.
but
to
it's reimbursable by the,
25,000, or it's not related to the 25,000 that we're expecting to offset the new position?
Not related.
Not
Not
related.
related.
Okay.
The $25,000 that are part of the net new position would be a new revenue line, a wholly new revenue line, and not related to that line nor to the $17,000 line. That $17,000 line is for items that come up in a given year that the town might not anticipate. If we're looking at if a certain issue comes up at a intersection, our town engineer might access those funds to hire a traffic engineer to take a look at, a curb radius or something to that effect. Or if there's an issue with a traffic signal, we may tap into those monies to take a look at, the timing. We've used those funds to buy if I recall right, a light meter when the Good Neighbor ordinance was adopted, and so that's what that item is. That $17,000 line item is about. And again, it's separate and distinct from what this new $25,000 revenue source would be.
Councilor Gleisteen, I direct you to page 197 of revenues. You'll see that there's a line item, staff site inspection fee reimbursement. And you'll see two line items. The department request was originally 15,000, and by further reviewing kind of what the opportunity might be, it was increased to 25,000 as the part of the 22 proposed budget.
Okay, and so you're describing this person as engineering tech. So is this a PE, or what level of person you'd be looking for this role? Someone with an engineering degree, someone with a PE, or what exactly would you be looking for?
Yeah, I think we'd be looking at someone with maybe an engineering, construction engineering technology type degree,
Okay,
probably a career degree, someone maybe in a CIT track,
Okay.
someone who a few years of experience, possibly out of school if they have the right kind of internships throughout.
Could
Okay,
be EIT, engineer in training, before they obtain their PE degree, someone out of school.
Yep.
okay. And maybe Liam, this question is for you too, because Jay's categories of the way that the staff is broken down is like admin full-time pay, manager full-time pay, clerical full-time pay, and then part-time pay. So whereas other departments seem to lump more things into kind of admin and staff. So is there a staffing plan or staffing level? So I guess when was the last time new positions were added to this department? And where are we at in terms of total staff? It's hard to break this down.
Yeah, and Jay, I'll take the first stab, and I'm sure you can fill in the blanks. The last time we actually added a position to this department was a proposed code enforcement officer a few years ago. That was a position that we were never able to fill on a full-time basis. We ended up supplementing that with a part-time employee who is fully certified. We've maintained that. We did remove the full-time equivalent from the budget last year, and we proposed to continue with that part-time employee.
Okay.
The person who was furloughed temporarily during the shutdown, and then was gracious enough to return to employment. So that was the last full-time position. So we've actually gone up one and then back down. Beyond that, full-time equivalents, when you look at the manager's pay, again, I don't have the specific detail in front of me, but I expect that is likely our kind of division heads. So that would be our town engineer and our zoning administrator. Staff would, our code enforcement officers, our sustainability coordinator, yes, they all fall under planning currently. So that's that, and then we have two admins that would fall into that bucket.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. All right. So that's really so Jay, so what's your net increase then? Because you're going to increase your revenue, and your net increase was almost 15% from the reduced amount last year. But what did your net come out to be by the time you take in the new revenues?
Let's see, I'm trying to pull my slide deck up here again. So as originally proposed, maybe I'm not quite understand the question, so I'll give you an answer, and then if it's not quite there, we can
Okay.
keep working. So I had my original proposal had a total expenditures of 1.2 and a total revenues of 750,000. I'm rounding numbers, and I hope that's okay. At this point, I'm now proposing to add to the revenues an additional 130.
Okay.
So that would make my net budget proposal roughly $330,000 plus or minus, trying to do numbers here just on the fly.
Councilor Gleason, is your question really, how does that compare to the net of the prior year?
No, I mean, so when we look at the percentage increases, through the budget book for the expenses, you can see, oh, well, here's 15% increase for the total planning department, but the, maybe it's not for the, but we don't have the offsetting revenues at the same place. So that's not, it really doesn't represent the amount that it's going to increase because Jay is increasing revenue as well.
Yeah, I mean, just from what he presented today, the increase from the proposed budget of 130,000 of revenue more than offsets the increase in, due to staffing and restoration costs that you talked about today. And Jay, that's kind of where I was going. One thing that we know during the pandemic that didn't stop was construction. Although you guys couldn't necessarily come into the office, so you really had to adapt. And we know we've been growing pretty fast. You're anticipating pretty good growth going forward, I expect, with the increase in fee revenue. How's your staff doing? Do you have capacity issues?
We have, I was able to write email to the manager earlier today. I think, the code staff that we have now is, I've been in town for 15 years and talked to people who have been around for a long time, as strong as we've ever been. We have, our zoning administrator is on top of his game, and we have 2 full-time code officers who really are just excellent employees. Couldn't be happier. And then, as was referenced, we have a part-time code officer who's been in the profession for many years and really does a lot of the permitting work. So the other 2 guys can spend the time in the field. So that's been really good. One of the challenges that we have moving forward, we did lose our commercial code inspector out of the fire department. There's someone else who's taking that position that we have the utmost confidence in. So we'll see how that bears out, but expect everything, so far everything's going very well. And I will say the code officers through the pandemic continued to do site inspections. They worked through reduced hours, but they worked through, and we set very clear expectations when we came to site that no one else was to be there, and we were, practiced as safe guidelines and parameters as we could. But
Thank you for that.
We'll stay on top.
Jay just reminded me, the commercial code officer, you might recall Chief Thurlow made reference to that in his presentation. He suggested that there could be some budget savings based on lower rate of pay and also hours. We don't recommend, and they've not included in what I presented at the top of the show, we make that change. We're very hopeful that it's going to work out, but in the event it doesn't, we really want to make sure we have the resources available to us that we can hire the right person for the job. So that's not part of my proposal, and I don't recommend it.
Very good. Well, thank you for that, Jay. You have my support for the position. I think you're an evolving department. You do a lot of important work. It's my sense is that it's definitely needed given the environment that we've seen ourselves in. With that, next up is going to be human resources and welfare. And we have two topics left. And I know that Councilor Anderson has a hard stop at 6:30. So I don't know if we can accelerate them to some extent.
Did you get that hint, Liam?
I did. Brevity is not always a strong suit. We're gonna try. All right, let's jump through this. All right, so just a brief overview. HR, we payroll, recruitment, employee relations. I think everyone's familiar with the kind of nuts and bolts of HR. That's true for this. Our department's really staffed at. We have a part-time GA person. I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But in terms of HR staff, I guess I'd classify as 2.75 FTE, with myself being the 0.75, kind of spread across the two departments. I know there's been some discussion about that. The other two positions, we have a payroll specialist and we have a deputy director of HR who really handles a lot of the day-to-day operations. Restoration costs, pretty straightforward. Of the three, myself, the payroll position, which was a prior employee who retired last year or earlier this year, I guess. We had one person who was on furloughed hours over the summer. We're obviously looking to restore all of those hours. They have returned to full-time employment. It's really imperative that they do. And the training and travel, again, I characterize this as staff investments. Is about $3,100, fairly nominal. Myself and the deputy director, we do have professional certifications that Councilor Anderson also referenced that we would like to keep up. It's not necessarily required for our positions, but I think everyone can appreciate sort of the shifting ground underneath us as far as legislation goes, and the importance of staying on top of updating, labor laws and things of that nature. The new initiatives, again, the first one is we have committed to increasing the part-time hours for our GA administrator. To give some background on this, we have a part-time employee who's actually a full-time GA professional in the town of Wyndham. Town of Wyndham also contracts GA with the town of Gorham. So in effect, this person's doing general assistance for three different municipalities. And he's been in the field for about 15 years. He's really, he takes a lead among state classes in terms of teaching the nuts and bolts of general assistance. So I think that's really, it's nice to have someone who has been able to meet our needs over the community's needs over the last 9 or 10 years. He's been with the town in this capacity. Again, it goes back a few HR directors when they brought him on. So I know that there's been some dialogue among the council. I know I've had a conversation or two with Councilor Anderson. So I'm happy to entertain questions in that regard at the end of the presentation. The other piece that, again, I know we've had some discussion on is we did do a kind of mid-year reorganization where we sort of reinvented the assistant town manager role, combined it with the HR director position. Part of that also required promoting the HR specialist to a deputy director role to kind of recognize that there was going to be a shift in the responsibilities and work associated with that position, and took on more of the prominent benefits administration, chief recruitment officer, things like that. In terms of opportunities, I know that a number of other presenters this evening have referenced how heavy the personnel costs are on these general government positions, and HR is no different. HR is about 95% staffing costs. So outside of reducing hours or reducing pay for those positions, it's really looking at those, what I characterize again as the staff investments, the training, the education, the travel, things like that. So budget cut impacts. Again, there's been a lot of, with COVID, there's been a lot of legislation, a lot of it being employment related. And that requires training and education. And so we've obviously gotten by during those reduction in hours for that one position. But, there was another position that we, is one of the few non-union positions we didn't reduce, the payroll position, because, payroll is something that for the vast majority of the town, we didn't, we had full-time police officers, full-time firefighters. We just couldn't afford to do that. but there was a knock-on effect. It required me to kind of go down and handle some more of the day-to-day stuff in the absence of the HR specialist, and that pushed off other things that we would have tried to get done in terms of initiatives, training, other things like that. That just, you can kind of push them for a time, but you can't do it forever. And so, again, those are kind of the impacts again of that furlough program. So that's HR in a nutshell. Is that quick enough? I think what I'd like to do, though, is I would like to talk about general assistance, only because I know it's been something. It does, you are seeing a fairly sizable increase in the GA budget for next year, and that sort of started. It started with increased client load back in, the fall of probably 19. We started seeing some increased client exposure. Some of it was a new Mainer population, although not exclusively. So we've seen a real steady increase in the amount of assistance provided to clients. I do think it's important to note that while expenses are up considerably over the last few fiscal years, you will see matching revenue in that regard. It is a benefit that's refunded by the state at a 70% level. One thing I will say, we have received some critique or some feedback on our general assistance program over the last year. Some of that was related to us moving remotely and the challenges associated with that. I have spent a fair amount of time kind of evaluating some of the concerns that have been brought forward from constituents. Again, I've talked with Councillor Anderson about this on a few occasions. One thing I do think it's important to underscore one particular point, which is I have no concerns that despite the significant increase in assistance, any of it is out of line or inappropriate. I've gone over our process with our GA administrator. Not only is he experienced, but every new application, he actually contacts the state directly to verify his numbers and his eligibility determination. So I have no doubt that everything that is being offered, afforded, granted is appropriate in that regard. So again, beyond increasing our assistance lines at a 20% threshold, which is across the board, and that was under his recommendation, I have increased his sort of the hours allocation by about 37%. So that is intended to continue to meet the needs of our clients, to make sure that we are being responsive to an in-need population. And I hope that will be well received both by the public and our clients.
Thank you, Liam. Go ahead, John.
No, I'm super supportive, Liam. So thank you for providing that extra context and for being responsive to my questions. I really appreciate it. One question I have for you, and it's something that I've seen a lot lately, and I actually was on Indeed looking at jobs and it popped up. There's a lot of people hiring for diversity and inclusion specialists, even in town government. And I'm just curious if you can share a little bit what the investment the town has made in that area. And is it something that you've thought about maybe further investing in going forward?
Yeah, great question. So last budget year, we did fund some diversity and bias training for our senior staff. Pretty much anyone who is involved in our hiring process. So this is sort of middle managers on up. We had a few Zoom trainings with a consultant who was actually Portland's former diversity and inclusion coordinator. Oddly enough, Portland decided, I believe last fiscal year, to reduce that position from full-time to part-time, which was peculiar to me, and I don't know the ins and outs. But we have continued to engage with that consultant. Actually, I had a call with her, I guess it was late last week, Tom, that to talk about our police chief process and help her advise us on some components of that where there may be some blind spots, and making sure that we're keeping that front of mind, as it were. It is an area that I see us continuing to look to invest in and understand. We don't have any concrete plans right now, but it's a dialogue and a relationship we're continuing to foster. And again, that was one of the subjects we touched on during my call with her last week, is other programs and classes that she's offering. So I think it's hugely important. I think that we're committed to doing the work and looking at investments in the future. I'd happily entertain a restoration or added funding for training and development.
Great. Thank you.
Great question, John. Betsy, do you have anything for Liam?
No.
Well-
Great explanation.
Yeah, and good focus on general assistance too. I think it's a big part of our responsibility to take care of those in need, especially given, some of the outcomes with the pandemic. So it's no surprise that those numbers have gone up, and I'm glad that you're budgeting additional staff time so that we can address the need. So thank you, Liam.
So
And who's driving for executive?
I'll do my best to move right through it for you.
Okay.
So executive, kind of, there's a strange kettle of fish underneath that title, HR and GA included, but Liam's obviously gone over that. Quick overview, you'll see the list of different items under the executive area. The one thing that's not noted here that is included is facilities, and we can certainly talk about that. It was just an oversight in the listing here. I don't feel as though I need to read those in detail. From a restoration cost, there were 3 staff members that were partially furloughed in the summer of 2020. That was kind of the end of FY20 and the beginning of FY21, if you will. And we've obviously restored those hours fully in the FY22 budget. And then the training restoration, Liam, I think we're showing this kind of the reverse of what many other departments have done. Can you just speak to this number here?
yeah, so that I believe, and Colette can also chime in here. I believe that's probably that is the all-in cost for, again, this covers the clerk's office. This would cover the assistant town manager, the town manager, all of those various sub departments. I believe that's the figure. Is that correct, Colette? Might be on mute.
So
Yes, it is.
So new initiatives, Liam alluded to it, August, September last year, kind of after budget was approved, we did go through a restructuring with Liam moving into the assistant town manager position, but keeping HR. So he's actually a quarter paid, if you will, out of my department, if you will, 75% still out of HR. So I characterize that as a new initiative just because it's captured fully in this fiscal year for the first time. And then we are asking for a new part-time position for the clerk. That is a new request. And I think all of you have an appreciation for Tody and Tracy, what they do in terms of council and committee support. In addition to that, elections has become just a much greater demand on their time. It's worth noting, about 5 years ago, we had a third full-time employee in the clerk's office. She moved to another community. We chose not to fill the position. So it's quite remarkable that our clerk staff is able to do the volume and the quality of the work they do with the staffing they have. So I hope you strongly consider adding these part-time hours to assist the clerk's office. In terms of opportunities, really the only way to look is reduction in staff. That's we're really staff heavy in kind of in all respects. And then next, impacts. The impacts that we saw, the purchasing agent also does accounts payable. So there was some drop off in responsiveness in that due to furlough and reduced hours. That's about the only thing I can kind of advance in that regard. If you could hold your comments, I also produced a quick little slide deck on facilities that we can run through very, very quickly. Do you have that handy, Liam?
I can pull it up. Give me one moment.
Should be at the end of that.
Oh, okay. It's included in the same
Yeah.
package.
Yep.
Okay.
So as he's pulling that up, over the last couple of budget cycles, we've actually moved all facilities over onto the executive line. Community services was often the catch-all. We really wanted to clean it up. And frankly, my long-term goal, hopefully not too long-term, is to create a facilities department. Councillor Gleistein asked about opportunities for collaboration with school. I see that's one area that we really need to, use. And frankly, they have the expertise that we could hugely benefit from. So that's a conversation that has begun and that'll continue with the new superintendent. So, one of the benefits of bringing this over is really gives us the ability to consolidate our custodial staff, particularly with bringing the new public safety building online with its adjacency to this building. We're able to move staff back and forth across the parking lot on a daily basis and as needs arise. We've also instituted centralized purchasing for all facility needs, cleaning products, paper products, and the like. And then unified systems, just management of all the mechanical systems. We all have an appreciation for managing a household. Just imagine the complexity of some of these mechanical systems and physical plant. So having this centralized has been a huge benefit in that regard. The new initiative for this year is we've obviously brought online a new facility with Alder Hall. We do have a budget of $25,400 included in this budget, really to cover the operating expenses of that building. I can report, just as an aside, we have performed successfully the foundation repairs, and I have let a contract for roof and trim and fascia repairs, all within the authorization council's granted. So my next order, frankly, is to figure out how we're going to use this for maximum community benefit. And that's a conversation I'm anxious to have and anxious to invite anyone who wants to be part of it into it. You can tell Liam put this together, a lot of words. I'm not sure what they say. No disrespect, Liam.
Yeah, I don't know if I did this slide, but I think this is I guess I would like to just interject and say that, a lot of the ground that we've made on consolidating our facilities or moving in that direction, really full credit to Nicole Hall and Todd Souza and Ken Kennedy and their staff. We've really had a hard time over the last few years recruiting custodial staff. We've been able to hire 2 in the last, again, all the times kind of blending together, at least 6 months or a year, who have really been outstanding additions to the staff. So I just want to make sure that we give credit where credit is due. They've really pulled it together nicely.
Fair point. And in terms of budget impacts with the shutdown and all, in the end, we actually don't have any additional impacts. We've been able to offset all of the unique and extraordinary costs for personal protective equipment for staff to get us back here, for safety and sanitation for staff and the public. These barriers, we've actually been able to make them permanent in the excise office. If anyone's been in recently, it's really a well done custom piece of protective equipment. And we also have some air purification systems in town hall. So all of that, thankfully, has been covered by various sources of COVID relief funds over the course of the last year. So I can safely say that we don't have any additional impacts that have not been covered by outside sources. So forgive me for being quick, but I was just trying to move through it, and we can drop back to anything you like.
Thank you for that, Tom. Go ahead, Bessie.
Yes.
I just got to say I have to go, but thank you, Tom, and everybody. Sorry, I have to run.
Thank you, John.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sean.
So Tom, so it sounds like maybe some things have been moved around in the budget. I mean, is there a way to see from past budgets, like what the increases are for facilities maintenance? Because the the public safety building maintenance is almost $200,000 a year now, with a 27.5% increase. Is that reflective of just the public safety building, or because there's a very high number for ground maintenance compared to some of the other facilities? Is that what it's costing us now to maintain that public safety building?
Yeah, operate and maintain, yes. There's custodial staff assigned to it, but then all the utilities as well. Keep in mind, this is the first fiscal year where we've actually owned it. For the majority of last year, it was under warranty. And so, yes, we're seeing the first fully loaded costs. Grounds maintenance is something that, again, is brand new for us. So admittedly, we have some estimates here. We are going to have to rely on some contracted labor to help with some snow removal and and grass cutting. I've challenged the community services grounds crew to do as much as they can. And I think grass is one thing probably within their capability, but maintaining beds and such, is labor intensive. So I think next year we'll have a much better sense of that, but we're pretty confident that these numbers are reflective of what the need is.
And is that when we voted for and bonded it, are we in line with what we thought it would cost to maintain this building? We must have had estimates at that time for what we thought annual cost would be.
I don't believe we necessarily did that analysis as we were selecting different mechanical systems. I know there was some value engineering that had to happen as part of the design. Certainly that level of analysis was done as part of that process to understand operations and maintenance costs of different systems. So I don't think that we have anything to compare that to, Betsy.
Okay. And so the municipal building, I guess, is it's gone down a little, but it's much higher than that. So what drives the municipal building in the budget line to be a lot higher than the public safety building? It seems like square footage wise, it's a different building. So I know I'm missing something. So.
Well, it's really the staff for one. We have more staff here that may be a bit counterintuitive, and frankly, probably that some of that staff ought to be spread more equally on public safety building. Some of the requirements on this building are really its night use in terms of converting rooms for one use or another. The Trigen facility also is located here. There's some unique costs associated with that, also some benefits I might add, but there's a fairly hefty maintenance, $30,000 or so associated with maintaining that system. It does again produce some value to us in terms of reduced utility costs.
Okay. Okay. And then I'm sure like this is just one it's got some explanation on page 151. There's a section that just says benefits.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that adjustments to the benefits and where would that have been before, that line item have been before? I mean, I'm sure it's not
Sure.
brand new spending, so.
We do have 4 collective bargaining agreements open at the time, and so we need to provide for the financial needs of imminent settlement.
Okay, yeah, gotcha.
So what will happen when we do come to terms and understand what those costs are, they'll be allocated out across the appropriate lines. But we need to carry and we lump it together for a number of reasons. We carry it in a single aggregate amount, and then we'll spread it out when we know exactly where it should go.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my only, it's a comment, not so much a question, but I really like where you're going with the facilities director or consolidation, however you want to phrase it. I think that's critically important as we have a number of potential facilities projects on the radar. Having someone or a team that can look at the overall entity and not just a specific need, I think is going to be really, really important. So.
Yes, that's clearly the direction we're going. And I think the school, they've been very receptive to our inquiries.
Good.
Yeah, I talked to another city, that had the one consolidated facilities, and there's just so many benefits to it in terms of like when people have time off and, backfilling for people that have to do different things. Yeah, it's definitely worth exploring that. And as we said earlier tonight, it's worked very well for IT.
Yeah. And the school has capabilities that we would never dream of having. They have craftsmen, they have actually not just custodians, but they've got a fairly small team of very capable folks that are very good at projects. And so, we'd look to tap into that expertise that we would never think of having.
Yeah, so it's a good start.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. We already covered item 5 of our agenda earlier. The only item left, I believe, is public comment. Is there anybody from the public who would like to comment? I'm not seeing any right now. So with that, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll second that. And Colette, would you take the roll?
Counselor Glystein,
Yes.
Counselor Clucci.
Yes.
With that, the motion passes. We're adjourned.
Have a great night, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Much.